Hi there, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to do a Faire-Isle pattern that I found, and today we'll be using the Knitmaster Mod 100, and let's see how the pattern goes. Here I'm using an E-wrap cast on. This green yarn I was using seemed to knit much better than some of the other yarns I've used. It seemed much smoother and much easier to use. And when you look at yarns, you just have to test them out and see which one works well with the equipment that you have. Here I'm changing the yarn so we can start the pattern. What I was doing with the pattern was just to have a look at it first, just to see how the pattern works per row, and just to check how many rows are needed for the pattern. You change your dial so you can start knitting the pattern. And what I found was that the pattern needed to be worked in 2 rows. So basically you're using 4 rows to make the 2 rows. So basically you're using row 1 and row 2 in order to do your pattern. Here I'm starting the patterning. Basically the patterning for the first row says 2 needles by 6. So here I'll be using the needle selector, and this is where I use the first color yarn in the pattern process, and by doing that I start the patterning. You just need to make sure that you've got the needle at the end so that it gets knitted in, and this is where you do your first color. This is where you repeat the same row, because you'll be doing 2 rows with the same color. Just neaten the needles behind that are in working position so that you can use the needle selector. I find it much easier when you use the needle selector and the needles are much more even. It makes it easier for the needle selector to work. Now you're doing the first half of the first row. You'll be doing the second yarn or the second color, and you'll be knitting in 6 needles here. I mentioned when I said a single row, we're actually doing 2 rows, not a single row, and we'll actually be using the carriage 4 times. The pattern says that you need to change your color and do the next batch of 6 needles in patterning, and this is what I've done. Just make sure that the first needle that you bring out so that you can knit in the second color. This is a repeat of the pattern, so I can bring the carriage back. Basically I would have done 2 rows. Once I've done this row, it'll be 2 rows that'll be done, and this is how you work out the pattern. This way of patterning is much longer than doing a machine that has a punch card. This takes a lot more time and a lot more concentration, and but I did find that when I was trying to fix a row, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. And so, you know, if it's not for commercial purposes, this is a fun way to do knitting. In the pattern instructions, they do the pattern where it's basically 2 by 2, and that works out to be about 4 rows. So 4 rows end up being about 8 rows that you'll be doing with the carriage, and you just got to make sure you do your count correctly so that you can get the pattern to work. I found this pattern quite easy to do. It was much easier than the previous pattern. The previous pattern I had to work row by row, whereas this can work by 2 rows of patterning, which is much easier to do than the previous Faire-Isle I did. Here I am doing 2 by 2, which was the main part of the pattern. Here is the last 2 rows that I'm going to do. Basically it was 2 by 6 again as for the top row, but the actual last row is actually a knitted row of 2 rows that you have to do so that there's a gap in between the pattern. I really like this pattern. It has a nice retro feel about it. Would I use this again? Yes, I would. For some of the reasons would be is that just by using 2 yarn colors it actually works really well. The other thing is it's on a row of 6. So on those rows of 6 I can actually use a different color. I can actually use about 4 or 5 different colors if I wanted to. If I'm working on a row of 6, then you know you can do a color there and a secondary color, and then you can do another 2 colors for the next 6 rows and so forth. So this is really a nice pattern and I would highly recommend it. Here I am starting the rows again. This will be the next 6 rows. I forgot to mention there's a row of knitting. There's a row of 2 rows of just plain knitting in between, and then you start your pattern. I found the brown yarn a little bit more difficult to work with. It wasn't as smooth as the green yarn. The green yarn was nice to work with, and I will probably get more of that yarn again. The brown yarn, I can't remember where I bought it, but it wasn't a brand name that was recognizable. It was just something inexpensive that I had, and so I decided to use that. But actually the 2 colors work really well, and I thought it would be fun to do. the last part of the patterning. Pushing the first needle forward on the side so that the yarn can be knitted in. Doing the second row coming back, I just wanted to mention I'm actually working with 4 rows instead of 1 row. I'm actually doing 2 rows and 4 rows with the carriage. Initially working with any of these patterns, I find that I'm much slower, but as you go along and as you start practicing, you start to get a bit faster. Also, you start remembering the pattern, and that makes it much easier when you're working with it, and also to speed it up. Here I am knitting the 2 rows. I'm just following the book here. This is basically where you've got to knit 2 rows in the single color so that you can go into the next part of the pattern. You don't have to do this, you just have to knit the rows. You just put your levers in position where it just does normal knitting, and that's where you do your 2 rows. But I just wanted to show you that this is how it can be done if you don't want to change the levers on your carriage. This was a lot more work to do to get the needles in the right position, and you know, it takes much longer. It's better just to knit those 2 rows that you got to do in the color that you need to knit. I was just wondering, those 2 rows that are knitted, is it possible to actually knit a number of extra rows, just plain knitting in between the pattern bits, so you could possibly do cabling? It might create an interesting effect, and it's something that maybe you could use. Finally finished the rows. This is the actual finished fabric. I found that the brown yarn was much more difficult to work with, and just to finish off was much more difficult. I also found that the brown yarn was a little bit tighter on the pattern for some reason. The green yarn was great, so I really love that yarn, and I'm probably going to get more of it. But overall this looks really good, and I really like the pattern. It's very basic, but I think it's a really cool pattern. I want to say thank you for watching. Please subscribe and leave a comment. I will be looking at the next project, and I will see you next time.